What's up, guys? Welcome back to the shop. In today's video we're going to be making a knife with some ball bearings and copper powder. Now this is a continuation of some previous projects I've been working on, and I'm trying to get the copper to be able to hold on to the ball bearings the most optimal way and to be able to actually make a knife out of it. Now I really enjoy the pattern, but I wanted to make it a specific way, so here we're gonna be working on that and trying to make an actual full knife that works and comes out, as clean as possible, and start working from there. And to ensure the best outcome, I clean up my ball bearings with some acetone, and here is the copper powder that I will be using for this project. It is a very, very fine powder, but it's the only one I've been able to run into, so we're gonna make it work. Alright guys, so this video is going to be a little bit different from the other ones because of the way this whole setup has to be. So what I have here is a preform. So basically whenever I make a knife, I make it this rough shape and then I start forging it out, hitting these bevels, which is going to cause it to bend over in that direction. And so I'll get that natural bend in the knife. And the reason why I'm going to be making a preform versus just making a longer billet or so is because of the way I have to stack up my canoe. And so that I can actually have some movement in the pattern instead of just a straight line. For example, like on this piece from last week, as you can see, it has very, very little movement versus what I normally do in a sand mine, which has a lot more movement. And that is because of the way it is pressed. You just press in one direction, everything just sticks together, and it doesn't really give you any kind of actual dynamic movement. And whenever we make sand mines, the dynamic movement comes from actually forging this piece out and giving us a little bit of a wave pattern. So to be able to mimic that, I have to start with my preform, which is going to be this shape. And so my canister is going to be this shape. This is just a piece of mild steel, stainless mild steel. And I'm going to be keeping this as a template for future projects or whenever I feel like making a knife like this. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to cut out my canoe, and I'm going to be making it in this shape out of some mild steel. And let's get to that. And I'll also be cutting my coarse steel, which is going to be the exact same shape so that it fits inside the canoe. And hopefully this works out the way I have planned it in my head. This particular canister is one of the more difficult ones I've made so far, pretty much because of how I decided to make it. And I learned a lot of things about what's the most optimal way to go on about it, and you'll see in future parts of this video how the way doing it this way causes me problems down the road. But in hindsight, I did have a particular idea in mind. And as it tends to be, those ideas that we have in our mind don't always come out the way we envision them once we start incorporating them into the real world. One of the things I really didn't like about this build also is the fact that there was so much welding involved to be able to make a canister like this. And the benefit of it definitely did not outweigh the amount of time that I had to spend cutting all the pieces exactly to size. And even here on this part where I'm bending it over, I actually did not incorporate or take into account the bend, so I ended up making it shorter than necessary and I ended up having to just fill it in with welding. Here I'm doing something that I do normally on all my canisters, and that is give it a coat of white spray paint. The spray paint I use is an enamel, so it goes on pretty thick and dries pretty fast. So I use it for basically everything, and the reason why it works so well is because of a chemical that makes the pigment white, and that chemical actually keeps the insides from welding onto the actual canister. So when working on this canister, the way I want to lay it out is I'm trying to do just one even layer of ball bearings. And since the ball bearings are so small, they're about 1/8 in diameter, it'll give me that rough 1/3 that I need with an 8-inch core that I'm going to be putting in there. The only real difficulty is working with this powder because the powder is so fine. It's not like the steel powder that I use, it's a lot finer. So it's almost like as if you're using powdered sugar instead of granulated sugar. So the more you move it around, the harder it is to actually get it to fit in certain areas. It kind of just becomes dust. I don't know if that makes any sense. But that's pretty much how it felt when I was trying to move around and work it. and because of that my different layers did not end up as even as I wanted to. The initial weld of this billet went pretty easy. I ended up using my oven, that way I had a very good regulated heat, and I worked it at roughly 1875 Fahrenheit. I'm not sure what that is in Celsius, but that's what I worked it in my oven, and that's just to get the initial weld. Alright, so our initial forge is done. It's still pretty thick. I'm gonna take out this outer jacket, and that should get rid of a good amount of this thickness, and we'll see what we have on the inside. I'm planning on just grinding the whole outside, and I'm hoping that there's enough of a gap to where I can just pop this off. But so far so good. Alright guys, so this is what we're looking fresh off of the outside canister that I had on it. It looks pretty interesting. Very hopeful it's gonna hold together, and overall it looks pretty cool. I'm glad it thinned out pretty well. The majority of the weight was from the actual canister and not from this. It's still a little honky, a little heavy, but nothing compared to what it was with the canister on it. So all this edge, I don't know if you can tell, you can see this is pretty much where our steel went up to. This is pretty much where our steel went up to, and this is just the excess. I guess whenever we press it, the copper and the excess copper and the ball bearings just squish out. It doesn't really carry the steel with it. You can see it more over here, like with that little outside edge. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to grind all the way around the knife again and expose the core steel. Make sure everything's roughly where we want it, and then we're going to throw it back into the forge. This time into the forge, not the oven, and we're going to start correcting any flaws and hammering it to its finished shape. Surprisingly, during this grind, there wasn't much actual loss. Everything that I ended up grinding was just a very thin layer of copper and ball bearing that had spilled over from the center mass of the actual billet. And I just ground up to the core steel, which was a clear contrast from the orange hue of the copper powder. So I got all the edges cut, and I don't know if you can see it very well, but our core steel is definitely in there. It's a little bit skewed to this side. Seems to be thicker on this side. I'll see what I have to do about fixing that. But all the way around the knife, we have our core steel in there. Not centered all the way through, but in there. So now we're just going to have to do some fine adjustments, bring that tank down a little bit, and thin it out. Just a tad. So we can get our curve and all our profile in here right. So basically all forging from this part forward was basically a waste. I did get a little bit of movement in the actual patterning that I wanted, but it was very little. It definitely was not worth it. In reality, all I had to do was straighten up the tank a little bit, and I should have called it good. But I was curious to see what would happen, and as you can see right there, a whole bunch of ball bearings just started flying out. And that is because, one, I wasn't using my oven for this, I was using my forge, so I didn't have a controlled heat, and two, I'm not really sure. I'm just gonna assume that the copper bond isn't as strong as I would have liked it to be. Alright guys, so what I have here is the knife. I tried to forge it a little bit, didn't really work out. Had a whole bunch of pieces trying to pop out from up here, and I really wasn't a fan of that. So next time, just to keep in mind, I need to do better whenever I do my layers. This was my bottom layer. As you can see, it came out very nice, very clean, very even. I have a little piece wanting to pop out up here. But other than that, it came out pretty nicely. This one, not so much. And I believe that this one didn't come out as nice because of when I layered it. I put this piece in when I hammered it in, because whenever I did my canister, whenever I welded the sides around the canister, some of the sides, instead of being straight, they ended up at a slight angle. And so whenever I went to put in my cap, it wasn't fitting. So I ground a little bit off. It still wasn't fitting. It had just a little bit. So I ended up hitting with the hammer, which moved everything around on the inside. But I said, whatever. So I just did it. I went on ahead and hammered it anyways. And I believe that whenever I pressed it, the excess lip that I didn't take off, when it was pressed, it caused unevenness around the top. So one side had unevenness and the other side was nice and even. So next time I need to cut off all the excess around it and make sure everything fits in nice and neat. And I'm pretty sure that's what caused my issues here. As you can see, the actual edge does push away to the side just a tad bit. But I'm going to put it on the surface grinder. I'm going to clean up the edge, and I'm going to get rid of all the crud. So we got nice clean steel, and hopefully this works out. If not, we're going to have one pretty side and one ugly side. But that's how you make experiments. For the surface grinder, I wasn't quite sure if I was going to be able to make it work because of the powder that's in there that's non-magnetic. It kind of got a little bit in the way of the actual steel and the magnets holding on properly. So I did it as quickly as possible. It did wiggle around quite a bit, but I made it work. And from there, I'm just going to do my rough grind on the knife. Next time I try this, I'm not going to be doing any actual grinding before heat treat, just to help keep the billet nice and straight after my quench and my temper. So guys, while the knife is tempering, I want to talk to you about the sponsor of today's video, Incogni. So recently I had to renew my insurance, so I decided to look for one that was a little bit cheaper. As you like to know, I like to save money when I can. And so I shopped around, and obviously in the process of doing that, I gave information to multiple companies. And ever since I went through that process, I've been getting spam calls left and right from different spam numbers, as well as random text messages. With the help of today's sponsor, Incogni, you can get rid of all those spam messages. So what is Incogni? Incogni is basically a tool. You sign up for it and you give them permission on your behalf to go through different websites and different marketing agencies and whatnot to be able to go and request your name off of those lists. Now what they do is they request it, and if it's not done, they keep requesting until it is done, and they'll keep going through scanning and making sure your information is taken off the internet. So that way you can get rid of all those spam calls and get rid of all those random text messages that I know you guys are getting, like I get them myself, where it's your UPS package or your Amazon package that hasn't been delivered because of whatever reason. Now click this sketchy little link and they'll get it solved for you, and then you just end up getting a virus and, you know, more personal stuff stolen. So be sure to click the link in the description down below. It helps out the channel when you use that link, and be sure to use code Bladeworks at checkout. That way you can get a 60% off a one-year plan. And as always, thank you to Incogni for sponsoring this video, and let's get back to our knife build. Alright guys, so we are out of the temper, and I'm not sure how promising this is looking. Check out that big old giant warp. And yeah, we're gonna have to fix that warp. Now, I could shim it and temper it again, which would be one way of going about it, or I can do what I normally do, which is hit it with the carbide peen. Now, I don't know how that's gonna react with the copper, and maybe it'll cause it to crack, maybe it'll cause the ball bearings to come out of place. I don't know, and since I don't know, that's exactly why I'm gonna do it. And hopefully it fixes it instead of making a mess. But there's only one way to find out, so we're gonna try to straighten it out with the carbide peen, and hopefully it works. Alright, so I whacked it quite a bit, as you can see by all the divots. And it was a no-go. It strained out a very, very tiny bit, but not nearly as much as I needed. And I ended up losing this little piece and this piece up here, which this little piece was fine because I can grind that, but this top piece is definitely something that I shouldn't be losing. I mean, it's gonna match the other side a little bit better, but still, nonetheless, it's not really giving me the results that I wanted. So I'm gonna have to shim it and temper it. But at least now we know that that doesn't really work out with these kinds of builds. So we're gonna shim it and temper it. Just to be clear, when I say I'm gonna shim it, I mean I'm gonna clamp it between these two 1/2-inch pieces of flat stock and hope for the best. Alright guys, so that also did not work. It's still pretty warped. And I'm running out of options here, so the only thing I can really do is just reheat treat it. So I'm going to put it into the oven, heat it up to about 1500 degrees, 1600 degrees, and give it a couple of cycles so it de-stresses, and we're going to quench it again. And we're going to be a lot more careful with keeping it as straight as possible in between. And we will also shim temper it and everything. So hopefully all this works. If not, we're gonna have a dud of a knife. I'll probably still finish it off, but I won't put a handle on it just for the sake of looking at it. And we're just gonna have to try again. So fingers crossed, hopefully this works out. So as I had said earlier in the video, next time I'm not going to be doing any kind of grinding beforehand, and it's just so I can bypass all this extra work and all this hardship. Alright, so we're out of the second quench and temper, and it's significantly straighter. I think it's might be fixable. I'm not quite sure. It still has a bit of a warp, but I seem to have lost a lot more of the copper on the outside. I'm gonna hit it with the wire wheel, and then I'm gonna go on ahead and start grinding this, see if I can straighten out that edge. Maybe I'll hit it with the carbide peen. I think I might be able to do a little bit of work on that edge with the carbide peen, since it's just on the edge. The spine in and of itself looks pretty nice and straight. It does veer off to the side towards the tip, but I could probably grind that straight. So we're gonna give that a try and see how it turns out. And if it's savable, we'll salvage it. And if it's not, then we might have to do this all over again. So from here on out, I'm just going to be doing my final grind and prepping up for my handle. This knife from this point forward is basically just like any other knife, minus a little bit of straightening I have to do by grinding. And normally that's just because I relieve a little bit here, a little bit there, or sometimes I have to bring the edge back ever so slightly so I can actually make that edge as straight as possible. Here I'm using burn through method, and I'm just using a scrap handle so I can have better control and better leverage over the knife when I'm doing my grinding. It's a pain to try to grind the knife and just hold on to the little stub at the end, especially when you get really close and you're working with finer grits. One thing I do want to take note of is that since this knife has a lot of copper integrated into it, it holds heat a lot more than a regular knife. So that is something that has to be taken into account while grinding. Now we're moving on to our handle. I'm using a piece of Paduke, and I'm just gonna do a rough hole on there. I'm gonna be using the burn through method for this handle as well, and that's just because I want to try out different methods of doing my hidden tang handles. If you watch me over the years, then you've noticed that I do a lot of full tang handles, and that's because I just found them easier and I started to do those. But a lot of knife makers say that hidden tangs are easier. I don't think so. They're not easier for me, but I do think that they are better overall. They're easier for, let's say, Damascus knives or knives that need etching, because then you don't have to etch around the actual spine of the knife into the handle, which makes it a lot easier. And I'm sure that's the reason why so many knife makers prefer doing a hidden tang, especially for high-end pieces with all kinds of Damascus, versus doing any kind of full tang. And because it keeps your hands off of the actual steel, which keeps it cleaner overall. But that's just my thoughts, and I'm not really sure. I haven't asked anybody, but that's what I figure at least. But I do want to get better at making them because I do think they are optimal for certain types of knives. I also acknowledge I have a lot of work to do on my handles. I see a lot of makers make all kinds of intricate handles, and while I don't really care too much for handles that are very shaped and have a lot of flat surfaces and different angles and stuff, I do like a nice handle that fits well on the hand. This one does fairly well, but I make it a little bit too square towards the end, and I didn't really like that. Up towards the front, it feels really good in the hand, and it's nice and thin. And now we're moving to our hand sanding on the Hand Shark. I only go up to about a 400 grit on these knives because they are experiment knives, and I don't really want to spend all the extra time, especially on this one with so many defects. I'm gonna be keeping it, so I don't really care too much about having a very fine hand sand on it. The etching on this guy went pretty well, and it got very nice and dark with the coffee edge. I believe I used a 1084 for a core, which does tend to get nice and dark, which I like very much. And now we're moving on to our handle. Here I do make a slight mistake once I'm actually putting on the handle, and I don't notice it immediately because as you can see right there, it is all covered in tape. But whenever I do put on the tang, I end up over forcing it, and I develop a minor crack on the side of the knife. I end up later filling it up with some glue, and it's not really a big deal, but I just figured I would let you. It is very easy to damage these handles, especially towards the front where they are very thin. And if you're doing your own, definitely be careful because then you have to switch out the handle and make a brand new one, which I definitely am not doing for this knife. Here is where I overforce it. I got really nice and snug up to it, but then I was like, I can go a little bit more, and I overdid it. For the sharpening of this knife, I did it off camera, and I just did it with some diamond stones. For now, I only have a 220 and a 1000 grit, and that's pretty much what I use. But I wanted to do it with the diamond stones instead of doing it with the belt grinder, just so I can get some practice in. And here's a final look at the knife. I think it looks pretty interesting. This side, the pattern came out a lot tighter. And overall, I like this side more than the other side. This was the bottom side of the billet, and this was the top side. That's why it has so much damage towards the top part. And as you can see, for those scratches on the edge, I definitely scratched it when I was sharpening it on the diamond plate, which perfectly shows why I need to do some more practice on it. And there at the tang, you can see a hairline fracture that I filled in with some black super glue. It's a very fine line, and everything on the inside is nice and dry and stabilized already, so I'm not too worried about that becoming an issue. But if it does, I'll just switch out the handle in the future. Overall, I consider this a very successful knife. Though it did not come out perfectly how I wanted, I'm happy with the result, and moving forward, I'm sure that the next one will come out way better than this one did. As always, guys, thank you very much for watching. I greatly appreciate y'all, and I will catch y'all on the next one. Peace.